Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Catholic Truth Podcast, where we teach and preach the truth that comes down over 2,000 years from Jesus and the apostles. We want to help you to know, love, live, and understand and explain your Catholic faith and to be set on fire for it. Today, oh, rats. I meant to ask you before the show, how do you pronounce your last name?
Oh, no worries. Petiprin.
Petiprin. That's how I figured, but I wanted to make sure.
Don't worry. Yeah, that's okay.
All right, for real. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Catholic Truth Podcast, where we teach and preach the truth that comes down from over 2,000 years from Jesus and the apostles. We want to help you to know, love, and understand your Catholic faith, to be set on fire for it and be able to defend it and explain it to others. And today we're going to be talking about a lot of things, all regarding the Catholic Church. Is the Catholic Church an institution? Some people say it is. Is it just another denomination of many? Some people say it is. Is the Catholic Church just a preference? Is it a dictatorship where it just controls its people and tells you what to do and you have to obey and you don't have any say in it? There's a lot of opinions and there's a lot of sayings of what the Catholic Church is, but today we're going to be talking about what the Catholic Church actually is. Is it any of these things? Is it all of these things? What is the Church? And to do that today, we have Andrew Petiprin, and he's going to be joining us. He's actually a former Episcopalian priest and now a convert to the Catholic Church. And I'm super excited that he's here today. If you've never heard of him before, he's written a bunch of books. He is the founder and editor of Spe Salvi Institute. He's a columnist at the Catholic World Report and a host of Ignatius Press podcast, and a long list of credentials and articles he's written, places he's spoken. But I want to welcome you to the show, Andrew. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Brian. Glad to be here.
There are a lot of misconceptions about church. I mean, Catholics and Protestants clearly have different understandings of what church is. Protestants have different understandings among themselves about what church is. But what is the Catholic Church? Everybody seems to have an opinion of it. And a lot of people say that it's just another denomination among many. But is the Catholic Church a denomination? And are denominations a good thing?
Well, that's the starting point for me, Brian, as I'm thinking about my belonging, my participation in the Catholic Church. Because as you said, I used to be an Anglican, I used to be an Episcopal priest, and I was kind of different varieties of Protestant before that as well. So my whole journey of my life into my late 30s, when my family and I finally came into full communion with the Catholic Church, was one of trying to make sense of denominations and what it meant to belong to the one church. And so, I certainly grew up with the mindset that denominations were okay, that there were sort of shades of right and wrong that we lamented that we saw in maybe other groups of Christians. And so, we had a certain humility about our own traditions, maybe, as we thought about whether we had it all right or whether anybody could have it all right, And so I certainly grew up thinking that the Catholic Church was a denomination, albeit a very, very big one. That said, when I became an Anglican, and I spent about 20 years as an Anglican before I became Catholic, I bought into, for a number of years, more of a theory that said something like there are different branches of the one church. So there probably are lots of groups of Christians that probably are on the wrong track, and we worry about them. But that in these traditions, in these groups that had preserved apostolic succession, that had, a certain adherence to the creeds and things like that, that maybe there was a way to say the Catholic Church is kind of the big kahuna, is kind of the biggest and maybe even the best, but that there are these other groups that kind of are nonetheless included in the big picture of what it means to belong to the Catholic Church. And this, of course, is the dilemma that the great John Henry Newman faced, that he sort of believed this theory up until about the mid-19th century. And he famously sort of came to see himself as being close, but not all the way. That he wasn't quite in the fullness of the faith. So to back up and sort of answer the question maybe in the crassest possible way of what is the Catholic Church, for me, the answer is fullness. It's the entirety. It's the wholeness, right? So it isn't just a way of being a Christian in the world, even if it's the most preferable way, even if it's the best way to be a Christian, but it is in fact just the way to be alive. It's the way to live in the world now that the Messiah of Israel has come and fulfilled all righteousness. So, that's the long and the short of it. So when we think of denominations, then it's just a very limiting way to think about how we go about in the world, really. It's just a way of saying, look, I have my way, you have your way. We're all kind of working out what it means, what the truth is. But do we ever really know? No, we don't. The Catholic Church has said from the beginning, sure, there are lots of things we don't know, but we do know the means of salvation. We do know what has been revealed to the world as the way of exploring the fullness of life with God now and for eternity. And that's what it means to belong to the church. When I was a Protestant, I thought, there's a visible church, okay, but what is that really? It's just a kind of practice run. It's just a kind of preparation for some invisible thing that will one day, come to be. And like we can work hard and maybe we can help it come to be. The Catholic Church doesn't believe that. The Catholic Church believes the church is the church. It came into existence and it will always be. It will be sort of, we'll sort of live in a new way when the Lord returns and everything is sort of brought to completion. But the church, the body of Christ, is visible and it endures throughout history, and it exists right here and now in time and space.
I have a lot of trailing thoughts going on down different paths right now, but it seems to me a couple of things. Number one, it seems like denominations violate the unbreakable principle of non-contradiction. Something can't be true and not true at the same time. 2 + 2 can't be 4 and 8. It's either one or the other. So you can't, have denominations that contradict each other on one hand. And on that same note, it seems to me that in large part, denominationalism has kind of destroyed our world in some ways, in the fact that it is a large reason why I believe, and maybe I'm wrong, but there's moral relativism today, because it all started with this, well, you know what, we all believe in Jesus, and, we disagree on the minor, or maybe even on some bigger points, but we all believe in Jesus, and that's what's important. And I feel like that's kind of eroded the foundations of truth and what is truth, and that truth matters.
Yeah, I would agree with that entirely. And yeah, the whole idea of denominations is very much a product of kind of modern thinking. It definitely was not the way that the early church thought about their identity. It's not the way that even in the Reformation people thought about their differences. One of the reasons that we've sort of forgotten the tragedy of the Reformation is that on both sides of the divide, these were matters of life and death. These were matters of eternity, right? The questions of like whether you remained a Roman Catholic, from a Protestant perspective, or kind of went along with a reform movement, had everything to do with the fate of your soul, right? It developed though as a kind of long byproduct of liberalism, really, that we would think in terms of more in terms of this denominational mindset, such that I talk about this in my book, which I know we're going to get into, but the idea of denominations is funny, even now in English, when you kind of stop and break it down. We think about denominations, we use that word only in two contexts for the most part. One is in relation to money, and the other is in relation to religion. And with money, right, it just means that everything cashes out the same in the end. If you have $100 bill, or if you have 5 20s, or if you have 100 ones, it's all the same, right? It all equals $100. But that's the way we've come to think about religion as well. That's the way we've come to think about Christianity and sort of different expressions of the faith. And that is just strange. It's just a strange way to think about, as you say, not only violating a kind of principle of non-contradiction, but just the basic ancient philosophical concept of truth, that there is truth. We believe as Catholics that that's been revealed in its fullness to the world. So yeah, denomination is not a word, by the way, that the Catholic Church uses. It does not use it about itself, and it does not use it about other Christian groups. It doesn't sort of acknowledge the principle of denominationalism. It says there's one church, it isn't divided, and it can't be divided. So people who are not in the fullness of communion with the Catholic Church are what we technically in the Catholic Church call separated brethren. They're They have a real connection to the Catholic Church by virtue of their baptism, if they're baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But they are outside the fullness of the experience of life with God. So, that's the thing that for me anyway, coming into the Catholic Church, I had to wrestle with that.
Yeah, and we're talking about Andrew's new book, The Faith Unboxed, freeing the Catholic Church from the containers that people put in it. And it goes through all the different containers, the denomination box, religion box. Is it a club? Is it an institution? Is it a dictatorship? And it goes through and sets people free from all of the, labels that people put on it. And it really tells the truth about what the Catholic Church is and what the church should be. So I think it's important what you're saying, the church is not a denomination. It's not just one among many. It's the one true church started by Jesus Christ. And I would say the early, and I've heard this yesterday and the day before, I hear it all the time now, that, different apostles went out and started different churches. They all had different churches in different areas, and they were just different denominations that even believed different things. But is that reality?
In a word, no, it's not. There were different churches, and we see right there in the pages of Scripture that St. Paul is writing to and visiting different churches. And the word church in and of itself is okay to use with regard to a local community. That's fine. But those little churches, those independent churches, as it were, in different geographical locations are still, by virtue of their communion with each other and ultimately with the Bishop of Rome, they constitute the church with an uppercase C. So yeah, of course, for centuries, and even now to some degree, there are different varieties of practice with regard to what language people worship in. It did definitely take a while to figure out exactly whether the church needed one universal liturgy, what it would look like, all kinds of different things like that. There are all kinds of different practices, but we can see right there in the pages of the New Testament, Paul is working out these differences and trying to relate to the communities to say to some of them, yeah, that part, that's okay, but that's not okay, right? I mean, First Corinthians is maybe the best place to go and look, where you see him really struggling with the community to figure out what are the differences that are okay, what are the differences that are not okay. And ultimately, Brian, it's another thing that I don't get into very much in this book, but that I've written about elsewhere, is this misperception about when people talk about Catholic, the word Catholic means universal. Now, in a way, that's correct, but actually, a better word for universal in Greek would be ecumenical. That's the word that's used to describe sort of the way things are everywhere. But the word that really in English best describes the Greek word Catholic, kataholos, is pertaining to the whole. So it's the entire faith. So whether you're in Corinth or in Rome or in Thessalonica or whatever it may be, those places all possess the entire faith, the fullness of the faith. There's that word again, the whole faith. So it's definitely not accurate to say that in the early church there were denominations. It just wasn't the case at all. That's just anachronistic.
And I don't think Protestants see beyond what they understand of their churches. They don't understand this. It's not their fault. They just don't know. Like, for example, I just spoke in Connecticut. I gave a retreat there, and I went to that church. Then I went to Missouri for 5 days and spoke at a parish mission. I'm heading to Alaska tomorrow to give another parish mission. All around the country, different churches, but they're all the same church. They're just in different locations, but we all teach the same thing. We're all part of the same church. And I think that's a good way to look at the early church as well. I like what you put in the denomination box chapter. You talked about Vatican II and how Vatican II called for a restoration of unity and what true ecumenism is. Can you briefly mention that?
Yeah. So, I mean, Vatican II, I highly recommend to people that they go and read a couple of documents if they're curious. Certainly I get into a little bit in my book, but people, they might be surprised by actually how accessible some church documents can be. And a great one that I refer people to is the one called Unitatis Redintegratio, which is the Vatican II document that means on the restoration of unity, which is the Vatican II document about ecumenism. There's that word that I just used a moment ago, which ecumenism in modern parlance means the discussion among different groups of Christians about the relationships with each other, essentially, right? Now, ecumenism to certain groups of Protestants basically just looks like trying to minimize all differences and to just sort of focus on bare bones aspects of unity, right? And increasingly, especially among kind of liberal Protestant groups, that tends to be just a kind of whatever we say, whatever we want it to mean, right? Now, from the Catholic perspective, Catholics are very interested in ecumenism, very interested in these dialogues with groups of Protestants, with other groups of Christians to figure out ways to find common ground. However, that title of that Vatican II document really underlines the way in which the Catholic Church approaches those arrangements, that it's on the restoration of unity, right? That it's about sort of ultimately about bringing people back into full communion with the Catholic Church, either as groups or as individuals. There are a couple of beautiful examples in recent history where there have been opportunities for groups to come in together into communion with the Catholic Church. Some of my people, Anglicans, were the beneficiaries of this through Pope Benedict XVI wonderful overture through the establishment of the personal ordinariates, where groups of Anglicans were allowed to come back into full communion together. So that can happen, right? More often it happens as individuals or families, But what happens when people come back from Protestantism into full communion with the Catholic Church is it's not the Catholic Church saying, hey, look, what you were before is nothing and meaningless and garbage. Actually, what the Catholic Church is saying to those people is, hey, look, by historical accident, these terrible things have happened where the church has found itself with different groups who are not in full communion with each other. But by God's providence, certain wonderful gifts have developed in those communities, which aren't all bad. And they're very useful. In fact, they could be a real blessing if you bring them back into full communion with the Catholic Church and then actually see how they might flourish even better. That's certainly been my experience as a former Protestant coming into the Catholic Church. So that's the way the Catholic Church thinks about this whole idea of restoring unity, that there's only one house. And what we're called to do is kind of welcome God's effort among us to make it all better and more habitable for us all to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to recommend that the chapter on denominations is really powerful. It talks a lot about Vatican II and how the call back to unity, the restoration of unity, how ecumenism is not just, let's get along, but actually let's help people to find the truth. It's very important in a world that has lost truth, in a world that doesn't even know what it is anymore, and certainly doesn't know what church is anymore. It's imperative that we do know. That we know, and we know it well, and the misconceptions about it so we can share them with others. How else are we going to give them the truth that will set them free if we don't know the truth first? And one of the core criteria, one of the core principles of this truth is, what is the church? Jesus didn't say, on this rock, I'm going to build my Bible. He said, on this rock, I'm going to build my church. He gave us a teaching and preaching authoritative church, which has guided us for 2,000 years. Not only that, he said he's going to be with the church for all time in Matthew 28, 19, and 20. And he said he's going to give the Holy Spirit to guide the church into all truth in John chapter 16, 13. So, the church is monumentally important. And in order to know what church is, I highly recommend that you get this book, you study it, you learn it, and you share it with others. All the people at Thanksgiving and Easter coming up, all the people who say they don't go to church anymore because of this and that. The more you read this stuff and the more you study these things and the more you educate yourself, you underline, you take notes, the more you're going to be able to share it with others. And God knows we need that today. We need a new apologetics in this church. We need a new evangelization on a wider scale in the church. So thank you for coming on, Andrew, and sharing this book with us and sharing your wisdom in the book with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Brian.
And where can people find you, Andrew?
Oh, all sorts of places. You can check me out at andrewpetiprin.com. You can find my columns at Catholic World Report. And a friend of mine and I have a little nonprofit venture called the Spe Salvi Institute. You can check us out at spesalviinstitute.com.
SPE.
SPESALVE Institute.com. It's named after the great encyclical by Pope Benedict XVI, Saved in Hope.
Yeah, and if you send me those links, I'll link them in this description section below so people can find you easily. But thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. And check out the book, Catholic.com, and make sure to check out our description notes below to find where Andrew is and to follow Catholic Truth. If you don't follow us already, why not? We have over like 13 platforms, 3 YouTube channels, a podcast, tons of social media. If you want daily inspiration, apologetics, and how to defend your faith, we're the place to go. Check us out down below and follow us already. And make sure to keep praying for us. We bring so many Protestants, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons back to the Catholic Church, more than you could ever know. And it's all because of your prayers and the work that we do here. So thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your monetary support. And thank you for all you do here at Catholic Truth. God bless you all. Thanks for watching.